Good evening. I'm uploading this shiur now because I do not know if I'll be able to upload this shiur tomorrow. I wish it's luck to everybody to understand this shiur. If there's any questions, always feel free to text or call me. We're now going to contrast two separate halachas and halachas korbanos and use two drashas and see how the two drashas work together. I'm going to explain quite a bit outside before we go inside, because the more clarity we have, the easier the next Gemara will be. There are two halachas. One is called shchutei chutz, which we said the criteria is anything that could have been and should have been brought to the Beis Hamikdash, and the person shechts it outside the Beis Hamikdash, one is chayav karos. We spoke about in that criteria, what's the halacha of the soil la'azazel, that's the he-goat that we threw off the cliff. We said the word lahashem excludes it from the halacha of shchutei chutz. That means if I take the soil azazel and I shecht it outside the Beis Hamikdash, I am not chayav karos because of the word lahashem. Now we have another topic, that is mechusas man, an animal which is not ready to be brought on the korban to Hashem. For example, there's an issa to shecht a korban before it is ready. For example, if you want to bring a korban olah as a present to Hashem, and you take a 5-day-old baby sheep and bring it as a korban olah to Hashem, you have not done a mitzvah because the baby is not ready to be brought as a korban until it is 8 days old. So if you bring a baby sheep as an olah less than 8 days old, you have not done a mitzvah. What about using a baby less than 8 days old for the soil azazel? Would you have said that maybe I'm allowed to bring? Why? What's the logic that I should be allowed to push a he-goat off the cliff, which is less than 8 days old? The answer is it's not a real korban. Since it's not a real korban, so maybe if I take a he-goat which is less than 8 days old, I should be allowed to use it. Says the Gemara that there's a drasha lahashem to include it, meaning include it in the issa. In the halacha mechusas man, a he-goat which is less than 8 days old is no good. You cannot push off the cliff a he-goat which is less than 8 days old. Asks the Gemara, why in one place does the word lahashem exclude and one place does it include? Again, let's summarize. Regarding the halacha of shchutei chutz, we say the word lahashem excludes the soil azazel, and if a person shechts the soil azazel outside the Beis Hamikdash, he is potter. When it comes to mechusas man, we say the word lahashem comes to include, and the soil azazel, which is less than 8 days old, is no good. This is a question which the Gemara tackles with. Let's see the Gemara inside. Samech Gimel Amud Beis. About 12 lines from the top. V'lahashem. Does Hashem come to exclude? We'll ask you a contradiction. That tells us that if anything which is brought on the Mizbeach has to be at least 8 days old. How do I know that even you can't make it Kaddish? You can't designate it as a korban less than 8 days old. Korban. Lahashem. The soya mishtalech, we cannot choose it as a korban less than 8 days old. Why? Why in one place is the Hashem coming to exclude the soil azazel, and one place the Hashem comes to include the soil azazel? Well, what the answers basically is that the word Hashem means for Hashem, something unique to Hashem. In one place it's coming to include, and one place it's coming to exclude, depending on what the previous context was. Regarding the shchutei chutz, the Torah says, bring it as a korban to Pesach Oyel Moed. Pesach Oyel Moed means something which is to exclude by the Beis. And let's see the more inside. The Pesach Hashem comes to include to all things that are chayav as a korban. That means anything which is the criteria that you could have brought to Beis Hamikdash. You're chayav for shchutei chutz lahashem lahotzi. The Torah says anything which is brought to the Pesach Oyel Moed, anything which could be brought as a korban, you're chayav for shchutei chutz. Comes along, the Torah says lahashem. Lahashem tells you no, only if it's designated for Hashem, that is to exclude the soil azazel. Hochet the isha, the fire offerings lahotzi, is coming to exclude because it's coming to tell us that only something which is actually brought on the Mizbeach as a fire, but not something which is not. La Hashem is the Rabbi comes to include. Basically like this. The word La Hashem means something which is designated for Hashem. When we read the pasuk about shchutei chutz, the pasuk says anything which is a korban, not allowed to do shchutei chutz. It says the pasuk La Hashem, only if it's unique for Hashem. So La Azaz is not unique for Hashem because you don't put it on the Mizbeach. By the bechus zman, the korban which is lacking time, so then we use the word La Hashem to say as follows. The pasuk says anything which goes on the Mizbeach as a fire offering. La Hashem, which excludes everything. Most things are not a fire offering. La Hashem comes to tell you, even if it's a little bit to Hashem. And therefore the word La Hashem can mean either only for Hashem or La Hashem, even if it's a bit for Hashem. And it depends on what the previous statement was. If the previous statement was going to include everything, this pasuk comes to exclude. If the previous statement was coming to exclude, this pasuk is coming to include. Now the Gemara tackles a very difficult question. We have a halacha that a soil la'azazel cannot be less than 8 days old. That's the halacha we just learned now from the word La Hashem. That means, if you go to choose the two he-goats, which is our first mission of our parak, you choose two he-goats. One is as a korban, one's la'azazel. And what happens is you choose them, and one of them is less than 8 days old. You can't do it. Why not? Because even if it's going to be, of course, the one which is going on the korban for Hashem, the one which is going on the Mizbeach, of course that can't be less than 8 days old. But even the one which is going to be pushed off the cliff, even that can't be less than 8 days old. Now the Gemara asks a kasha, what's the havamil? Why do you need a special pasuk to tell us that an animal which is less than 8 days old can't be used la'azaz? Why do the pasuk? The halacha of the two seirim, if you remember, we said many times, what do? We take a lottery to designate one for Hashem, one la'azaz. If they both have to have an equal chance of winning the lottery, it's a 50-50 chance, one Hashem, one la'azaz. If one of them is less than 8 days old, you can't include it in the lottery. How are you going to include it in the lottery? Whatever happens, it wouldn't be no good because maybe it would be La Hashem, even if you do not have a pasuk to tell us that Sola Azazal must be less than 8 days old. You anyway don't need that pasuk. Since there's a possibility that it should be brought on the Mizbeach, so why do you need the pasuk to tell us that a special drosha? Anyway, you can't bring it because you might go on the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara, the only reason why Sola Azazal is no good if it's 8 days old is because the Torah includes it. If the Torah were not included it, I would have said you can use even an animal which is mechus zman, let's say less than 8 days old as a Sola Azazal. The halacha is, in order for it to be fitting for the La'azazel, it has to be fitting La Hashem, and this is not fitting for Hashem. Here we're coming to a topic which will come again a few times, and this is the concept of dichur. The halacha is a korban which was fitting, and then became unfitting for whatever reason. We'll have a few cases. There's a machlokas, if later became fitting again, can you use it as a korban? And here the Gemara tells us that Chanan HaMitzi holds you can. Let's see the words inside. Afilu dam bekos. You've got the blood in the cup. That means you did the lottery, you designated one for Hashem, one la'azaz. The one for Hashem, you shechted it, you caught the blood and it's inside the cup, and now the other one, la'azaz, drops dead. Now we've always said till now, before Chanan HaMitzi, what would the halacha be? We've always said till now you have to make a new lottery. Why do you have to make a new lottery? Because you have to have two he-goats, one La Hashem, one La Azaz. You don't have any more two he-goats, one's dead. Chanan HaMitzi says, no, it's not important. Maybe you could just take another he-goat, add it to the cup, and you save the cup and the he-goat, you've got the two. This is a raya that you don't need the lottery. Since you don't need the lottery, says the Gemara, let us assume that in that particular case, where you're adding a he-goat after the other one's been shechted and you already caught the blood, that he-goat you might have thought you could take even if less than 8 days old. Kabashpil on the pasuk that you can't. Again, the question was, the Torah tells us a special drasha that you need that the soil la'azazal cannot be less than 8 days old. Furthermore, why do I need to have such a pasuk? Even if I don't have such a pasuk, I would know such a halacha from the very fact that the Torah says that they each have to have equal chance of being for both. And the soil la'azazal can't be La Hashem if it's less than 8 days old. It says, well, yes, there's a case where you've already shechted the one for Hashem, and all you've got left is one more that you have to bring. Says the Gemara, you're wrong. That's not a good right. And he holds that even if something is invalid for a certain amount of time, it can still be valid later. You've got no proof that you don't need to make a lottery. Maybe you do a lottery and you bring it. Again, In the case where you shechted the higot la Hashem and you caught the blood, and then the soil has also died, the Gemara that haven't understood, you just take any higot and you say, now I've got a pair. Says, well, maybe not. All Chanan HaMitzvah was telling us that the fact that it was invalid for a certain amount of time does not make it invalid forever. But it does not teach us anything about what happens to the second one. Do you have to bring it through a lottery, through the process of a lottery or not? Says the Gemara that maybe you need to bring it through the process of a lottery. So what would happen is you did the lottery, did two higots, one la Hashem, one la Azazel. And then you find that the one la Azazel dies. So then you do another lottery to designate the one la Azazel and you match it up with the cup. Says the Gemara, Hamani Rab Shimon, he read this Rab Shimon before, the Tanya makes Echad man, maybe Chaver Shlo Ba'agola to be Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon holds that you do not need to make a lottery. So according to Rab Shimon, you don't need to make a lottery. Therefore, if one of them dies, you can choose the other one without a lottery. So let's get the case very clear. You've got two higots, both of them good age, shechted one, and then you designated one la Hashem, one la Azazel. Then the one la Azazel died. So now you have to bring a replacement la Azazel. And the question is, does it matter if this replacement is less than 8 days old? Says the Gemara, we have a special pasuk that it mustn't be less than 8 days old. It mustn't be mechusas man. The Gemara, what do you mean it must be mechusas man? Obviously it can't be mechusas man, because it has to have the potential to be la Hashem. And if it's less than 8 days old, it doesn't have the potential to be la Hashem. Answers the Gemara, no. We're talking about a case where it died after you designated one for Hashem. So now you only need to designate one la Azazel. So that's why you need a special drasha to tell us that it is okay. Let's get the case very clear. You had two higots. Let's explain the question once more. The Torah with the special drasha from the word la Hashem tells us that the soil la Azazel must not be less than 8 days old. As to the Gemara, of course it can't be less than 8 days old. If it's less than 8 days old, then you don't have, it's not fitting to be bought for Hashem. If it's not fitting to be bought for Hashem, how can it be a soil la Azazel? Answers the Gemara, yes, you need a special pasuk. Why do you need a special pasuk? Because maybe you designated one for Hashem, one for Azazel. And the one for Azazel became a Baal Mum. And once it became a Baal Mum, you need to redeem it. So you redeem it on another one. Now, when you redeem it on the second one, that one does not need to have the potential to be la Hashem. Since it does not need to have the potential to be la Hashem, so therefore maybe I can take one less than 8 days old, and that's when you need the pasuk. Says the Gemara, we're not taking with the pasuk be'imuma. The soil la Azazel, what are you going to do with it? You're going to push it off a cliff. You're never going to actually bring it on the Mizbeach. So maybe if it's got a mum, who cares if it's got a mum? Says the Gemara, yes. The Tanya ve'isha le'situm mehem elu achalovim. Baal mum, you can't bring the fats on the Mizbeach. What happens if you've got one Baal mum amongst many not Baal mum? Let's get the case clear. You have 10 sheep, let's say all oilers. You shech them all, and you're putting the limbs on the Mizbeach, and suddenly an observant Kohen notices that one of the oilers that you shechted has a mum. It's got a split lip. You never noticed before for whatever reason. Now you've got loads of limbs all over the place. You don't know which limb belongs to which animal. So what are you going to do? Put it on the Mizbeach, but you don't know which one's going to go on the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara that the halacha is you can't put it on the Mizbeach. Talmud Lema mehem, even part of them, even some of them, you can't put on the Mizbeach. Even though some of them are okay and some of them are no good, you can't put them on the Mizbeach. Carries on, Mizbeach, Mizbeach, Zuzikastomim. If a Kohen sprinkles the blood of an animal that has a mum, he's over on a lav. La Hashem, the Rabbi is Soya Mishtalech, that's to include the Soya Mishtalech. So we have two drashas. One to tell us that the Soya Mishtalech, which is one of these strange korbanos, because it doesn't actually get brought on the Mizbeach, you just push it off a cliff. One drasha tells us that if it's a Baal Mum, it's no good. One drasha tells us that if it's less than 8 days old, it's no good. Even though you may say it's not a real korban. Since it's not a real korban, it doesn't matter if it's less than 8 days old, or if it's a Baal Mum. We have two drashas. One to tell us less than 8 days old, it's no good. And one to tell us if it's a Baal Mum, it's no good. Says the Gemara, why do you have to have two drashas by Soya Mishtalech? Why do we say if it's less than 8 days old, it's no good? Why do if it's a Baal Mum, it's no good? Says the Gemara, you have to write both. You might have thought less than 8 days old. It's never really fitting to be bought as a korban. It's less than 8 days old. If it's a Baal Mum, it should be okay as a son of Mishtaleach, the Mot Zimni, in Meloit. Because from the Baal Mum, it is a bit off-putting to bring a Baal Mum for some Mishtaleach. There's nothing bad about it, it's just very young. I just want to summarize a little bit what we've learned because it's very important to get it clear for next month. Okay. We've got a special korban in Yom Kippur, which is called the Sar Mishtaleach. That korban is not shechted in the Beis HaMikdash. It's not brought on the Mizbeach, it's pushed off a cliff. And the question is, since it doesn't have the normal halachas of a normal korban, does it have the normal parameters, the normal halachas of a normal korban? And this question can be asked regarding 3 different topics. Topic number 1, if you shecht it outside Beis HaMikdash or you chayav kavos. Topic number 2, does it matter if it's less than 8 days old? Topic number 3, does it matter if the Sar Mishtaleach has a mum? Regarding all these 3 questions, we've been tackling it for the past yesterday's daf and today's daf. Regarding shechting it outside the Beis HaMikdash, we said that since it's not shechted in the Beis HaMikdash, if you shecht it outside the Beis HaMikdash, one is not chayav kavos. That's halacha number 1. Regarding the second 2, it has the same halachas as a normal korban. Just like a normal korban less than 8 days old is no good, also the Sar Mishtaleach less than 8 days old is no good. Just like a normal korban Baal Mum is no good, so to the Sar Mishtaleach Baal Mum is no good. So that is what we've learned. The Gemara asked the question, why do we need to have 2 halachas by the Sar Mishtaleach? This interesting korban for the Sar Mishtaleach. And the Gemara says because each one's got a different difference. The mum is off-putting. So you might have thought that's no good. But just being little, that's not a problem. Another way around, if it's just very little, you might say, well, it never ever became fitting for a korban. But Baal Mum, which once it was fitting for a korban, and now it got a mum, it might not matter. Kamash on that both these things matter. So let's summarize again. Regarding this special korban Sar Mishtaleach, there are 3 halachas. If you shecht it outside the Beis HaMikdash, you are potter because you will never get shechted inside the Beis HaMikdash. Regarding the halachas of less than 8 days old and less than the Baal Mum, those 2 halachas is included, and therefore it is part of the halachas of the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore you cannot bring a Sar Mishtaleach, which is a Baal Mum, and you cannot bring a Sar Mishtaleach, which is less than 8 days old. Even though it's not being on the Mizbeach, you can't. Now, the Gemara asked the question, what would be the havmina? Why would you even think that Sar Mishtaleach less than 8 days old is good? Anyway, it's no good. Why is it no good? Because since it has to have the potential to be the soy which goes on the Mizbeach, how can you possibly bring it as a Sar Mishtaleach? To which the Gemara gave 2 answers. One is it's a shittas of Shimon that does not need a lottery. Since it does not need a lottery, so it's possible to designate the Sar Mishtaleach without a lottery. So therefore, maybe you should be able to choose it on its own. That's one possibility. And the other one is where you had a Sar Mishtaleach which was okay, then it became a Baal Mum, and now you want to redeem it onto another one. You might have thought if it's less than 8 days, it's okay. That's why you need a special posel. Well, now to Sabach Daled and Modalef, the top line. Rov Oma. What happened was like this. You took the 2 he-goats that were both more than 8 days old, and you designated one La Hashem and one La Azazah. The mother of the one of La Azazah, the mother of the one that's going to be pushed off the cliff, was living in somebody else's house. It's an adult he-goat. And it had the adult goat, and there was a not well person in the house. And they shechted the mother in order to feed this not well person. And now the he-goat is not being possible to put as a korban. Why is it not possible to put it as a korban? Because it is mechusas man. It's osaves b'noi b'yom echad, which is possible. And we said many times osaves b'noi b'yom echad. We said it yesterday. The osaves b'noi b'yom echad is no good. Why is it no good? Because the halacha is that it's mechusas man. So here you have a case where it became mechusas man after it was designated la'azazah. The question of the Gemara was, how can you possibly have a havamna to use the he-goat la'azazah if it's less than 8 days old? It's mechusas man, and if it's mechusas man, it can't have the possibility of being la Hashem. Answers the Gemara that we're talking about a case where after it became designated la'azazah, it's a chap. You had the 2 he-goats that were both okay. One was La Hashem, one was La Azazah. But after it became La Azazah, then it became Bechusas Man because the mother was shechted for a chayla. In such cases, it's awesome. You don't shech the he-goat, you push it off the cliff. Pushing off the cliff is not a shechita. And the Torah says not allowed to shecht a mother and its child in one day. They say in the West, that's how it's sold, push it off the cliff, that's its shchita. So therefore, we've got three possibilities of why we need a special drasha to tell us that the soila azazel must not be mechusas man. The question is, of course, it can't be mechusas man because it has to have the potential to be a soila Hashem. There are three answers. Either we're going to a b'shimon that does not need a lottery, so you can designate it without a lottery. Or we're talking about a case where it was chosen correctly, but then later got a bar mum, and you want to redeem it on another soila azazel. And the chiddush is that the second one mustn't be less than 8 days old. Or we're talking about a case where it became mechusas man after it was designated la'azazel, and the way it became is that the mother was shechted for a chayla. Okay. Going back to our Mishnah says that if the Kohen Gadol did the lottery correctly, and he has one he-goat la'Hashem, one he-goat la'azazel, and then one of them dies, what he does is he can't just choose another one to be the partner. We don't hold like Reb Shimon that you can choose without Hagdola. We hold you have to have a lottery. And what happens is you have to make a whole new lottery. So let's say you have A and B. A is La Hashem, B is La Azazel. And now B dies. Then you have to take C and D, make a new lottery, and then you say like this. Let's say C goes La Hashem. You don't need it because you already got one La Hashem. The only one that died was La Azazel. So you take D La Azazel. And now you're going to have one animal which you've got nothing to do with. So the Mishnah says that one of them has to die. We're going to have a big machlokas now. Which one has to die? Let's get the story very clear. A and B. A la Hashem, B la Azazel. B dies. So now you do C and D to designate one of them la Azazel. D was la Azazel. C is la Hashem. Which one would you recommend should die? Should you say like this? The D takes over B, so that pushes off the cliff, and the B is already died. The only question now is A and C. Do you say A shall die? Because at the end of the day, you had A and B, B died. So now it's no longer a pair. So you're starting from scratch. You've got C and D. C will go la Hashem, D la Azazel, and A should die. Or do you say, why should A die? A was designated la Hashem. The only reason you took C and D was to make a new lottery. A new lottery, C shall die, and D shall take over the place for la Azazel. I'm going to explain the question again, just to make it very, very clear. You had two he-goats, A and B. A was designated la Hashem. B was designated la Azazel. B died. B died. So now we should only need one more animal because only one died. But the problem is you can't designate an animal without a lottery. So you chose C and D. C you chose and ended up la Hashem, D la Azazel. So the D takes over from B and you push it off the cliff. The question is, what are you going to do with C? Are you going to then say C should be in place of A and A shall die? Or should you say A shall continue being a Soil Hashem and C shall die because it's superfluous? Says the Gemara inside. Im shall shem meis ze shall olav v'chulu. Amarav sheni shvizug v'shen yikorev. That means A shall be brought as a korban. Sheni shvizug sheni yira, and the second one, that is C shall die. Why? Because A was very good. Let C die. A shall die. Sheni shvizug sheni yikorev, and C shall be brought as a korban. So I'm machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan on what to do in this case, and I'm summarizing it yet once more. A and B. A la Hashem, B la Azazel. B died. You chose C and D. C la Hashem, D la Azazel. D takes over from B la Azazel. The question is now, what do you do about C? Do you say that C takes over from A, or do you say no? At the end of the day, A was fine. A, nothing happened to it. A should take over, and C shall die. Says the Rabbi, Rav Sava Barechaim Einon Nidchin. End of the day, A was good. Keep A, and what's wrong with A? A was fine. Let's keep A as a korban, and C shall die. Rabbi Yochanan Sava that A is no good. Let's listen very carefully to the words of Rabbi Yochanan, because this comes up many times in Kodshim, and it's very, very important. Rabbi Yochanan says like this. Let's take the case very clear. You had A and B. A la Hashem, B la Azazel. B died. At that moment when B died, could A continue? No. A can continue, because the halacha is it has to be a pair. So you do the lottery, and you found a replacement for B, which was D as a replacement for B. The problem is, a replacement is very good, but A, there was a couple of minutes where A could not be bought as a korban. Why couldn't it be bought as a korban? Because B died. Once it was no good, once it was rejected, it can never be brought back again. Because since in the end of the day, there was a few moments while we were doing the second lottery, that A couldn't be bought because it wasn't a pair. So therefore, A can never be bought again. A has to die, and C and D take over from A and B. My time at the Rav. Why does Rav hold that we don't say that something that's being rejected is rejected forever? In the end of the day, Rav agrees with Rabbi Yochanan that till you take a second pair for A can't be used. Since A can't be used, it should be considered rejected. If it's rejected, how is it reinstated when you get a second set? The halacha is that once something is rejected, it's rejected. Says the Gemara, he learns it out from every single korban until it's 8 days old, it's rejected. Once it's 8 days old, it's reinstated, it's okay. So you see that something which is rejected can be reinstated. So too over here, A can't be used for the first few minutes because B died, it's not a pair. But later when you make another lottery and now you've got a replacement for B, so who cares? So therefore Rav says it's okay. Says the Gemara, let's see the word inside. Even though now, before 8 days, it's rejected. Later becomes reinstated, it's okay. Also over here, it was rejected when B died because it wasn't part of a pair. Once it got its replacement as part of a pair. How can you possibly compare? By the animal which is less than 8 days old, it's not really rejected. It was never suitable. Once it became suitable, it's suitable forever. Masha'inki over here, A, while B was alive, was suitable. Once B dies, it's rejected because it's no longer part of a pair. And then later you want to reinstate it, that's no good. There's a huge difference between something which was never suitable and then became eventually suitable, which that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So something which was suitable became rejected and now you want to reinstate it. How can Rav compare his case where it was rejected and you want to reinstate it to the case of the animal that was never suitable? The one which is less than 8 days old was never suitable. It was suitable when they had a pair. And it became unsuitable when B died. The reason of Rav is a different thing. There is a concept of a Baal Mum, an animal which at 9 o'clock in the morning did not have a mum, is good to be brought as a korban. At 10 o'clock it has a mum, it's no good. At 11 o'clock the mum goes away, it is good. So you see that it is possible for something to be okay, to be rejected, and to be reinstated. Says Rav, the same thing over here. At 9 o'clock you did the lottery, A was fine. At 10 o'clock B died, A was rejected. At 11 o'clock you did another lottery to find A, its partner, so it's reinstated. Just like by a Baal Mum Oiva, a blemish that goes away, you have a situation where it's rejected and reinstated. The same thing, we have the same thing by a lottery. Says the Gemara. Let's see inside. How do you tell me Baal Mum Oiva? Baal Mum Oiva, now it's not fitting. When it becomes fitting later, it's okay. Here it's no different. Says where do we see that? The blemish is within them, which we darshan. Mum bom, while the blemish is within them, so it's no good. If the blemish goes away, so it is fitting. So we see there's a concept of a blemish being there, it's no good. The blemish goes away and it is okay. Rabbi Yochanan, why does he say that A is no good? Why? What's Rabbi Yochanan's cheshbon? He says A was rejected when B died, and it can't be reinstated. Why can't it be reinstated? Just like by a Baal Mum, it has a blemish, and then becomes reinstated. Also, it should be reinstated. Says more, Rabbi Yochanan, miyat rachmona bohem. It says, the pasuk says in that pasuk, ki moshchosam bohem, within them, mum bom. Bohem is a limitation, only within them. Only with a Baal Mum over, only with a blemish that passes do we say it's rejected and reinstated. Oh, so Mor says, Mum bom again. They, when the mum goes away, it's okay. And everything else which is rejected, once it's rejected, it's rejected. The Rav, what does he do with the word bohem? That through a mixture it is okay. That if you've got limbs which are a mixture with the limbs which are not a mixture, that means you've got limbs which are Baal Mum with limbs which are not a Baal Mum. Which we said earlier, you can't put them on the Mizbeach. Why can't you put them on the Mizbeach? Because the Torah says that even even a part of them you're not allowed to. Comes along the Gemara and says That Rabbi Loza if one of the heads went on the Mizbeach, Yakuvu Kula Roshin Kula. You can put all the heads. Why? Because we say since one was burned, we assume that the one which was burned was the original one which had the mum, and the rest is no good. If one of the legs went on, even if you bring all of them, except for one of them, so the word Bohem tells us that if you have 10 sheep, one of them is found to be a Baal Mum, and you set up on the Mizbeach 90% of the limbs, the last 10% cannot be put on the Mizbeach because we're worried that maybe it came from the Baal Mum. The Idach Nafkanemi Bom Bohem. That's just two things. The hay in the Bohem tells us that even a mixture, you can't put any on the Mizbeach. And the Bom tells us that only within Baal Mum do we have this halacha that something which is rejected can be reinstated, but everywhere else it can't be reinstated. The Idach Bom Bohem Loidoish, it doesn't dash and Bom on Bohem. I want to summarize what we've learned. We had two Higos, A and B. A was chosen for Hashem, B for the Azazel, for the pushed off the cliff. B died. You can't continue with A because A has to be part of a pair, and now it's no longer part of a pair. You can't continue. So you bring C and D, you do a lottery. C became La Hashem, D La Azazel. The question is what to do next. Rav holds A is now reinstated because now it's got a pair. D is its pair. D takes over from B. And you continue with A and with D. That is Rav's Shitta. Rav holds that something that's rejected can be reinstated. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He says, I don't agree with you, because he says that A was rejected for the few minutes that B was dead. Until you found a replacement, you couldn't continue with A. Since you couldn't continue with A, so therefore A has been rejected. Once it's been rejected, it can never be reinstated, and therefore A has to die. B is already dead. So D takes over from B, C takes over from A, and A is locked up and has to die. So I want to get again very clear. According to Rav, you choose A and D. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you choose C and D. Again, the case. A and B, A la Hashem, B la Azazel. B dies. So then you take over, you do another lottery. D, Los la Azazel, takes over from B, and C takes over from A. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you use C and D. According to Rav, you use A and D. Now, it makes no difference, by the way, whether the B died or A died. Should A have died, we'll do a lottery, and then we'll have to replace A with another one, Hashem. And all the halachas we just said would be exactly the same, except instead of looking for a new one for the partner for the Hashem, we'd be looking for a partner for the Azaz. Now that we'll ask a very fundamental question. Rav said that A is okay. The fact that it's rejected doesn't bother us. It's rejected and reinstated. Thank you very much. But why does he argue with Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda said you have to use C and D because he holds A is being rejected. Once it's rejected, it can't be reinstated. But Rav should have said either A or C. Why dafke A? Why specially A? According to Rav, when something's rejected, can be reinstated. But that's no reason to reject C. You had A and B. A la Hashem, B la Azazel. B died. Fine. So we have to find a replacement. So we did C and D. D la Azazel and C takes over. Thank you very much. But according to Rav, Rav should have said either A or C. Rabbi Yehuda can only hold with C because he holds that you have to take a Lashem and you've got no choice. Because he holds that once one's rejected can't be reinstated. But Rav, why does he hold only A? And one of the more answers is the Rav holds that the first one is the most important. One which is A is better than C because it's first. And that reminds us of a Gemara which we had only a few days ago. And the next Gemara is very easy because it's just a repetition of a previous Gemara that whenever you've got a question of A or B, or in this case A or C, we always go for the earlier one. It says the Gemara inside. We're up to the first wide line, the middle of the first wide line on Samach Talad Domudal. Okay, you hold that it doesn't matter if it got pushed away, it can be reinstated. You should bring either one. He holds that the first is most important. Says, well, hi Rabbi, which Rabbi? This Gemara is a repetition of the Gemara we just had. Where do we see that Rabbi holds the first is more important? If you say it's Rabbi referring to the stocker boxes that you take the money out of the Machzor Shekel, it's not. Sholish kupos, 3 boxes, sholish saw. Each one had 3 saw. Should go into the Lishka. With them, you separate the money for the Lishka because of Alein Aleph Beis Gimel. Why do you write Aleph Beis Gimel? Leda is many to Morishan, to know which one is first. Because the mitzvah is always the first. So we see that you hold the first is most important. So also over here, A is most important. There, when you did the first box, the second box was not ready to be used. So therefore, of course, the first is more important. But over here, A and C became suitable at the same moment. Let's examine the case very clearly. You did a lottery for A and for B. B was La'azazel, B died. A is not suitable now at all. Only when you finish doing the lottery for C and D is it suitable. So therefore, in fact, what's happened is you've got a complicated case where A and C become suitable simultaneously. Because A was not suitable until you did the lottery. By the time you do the lottery, C is suitable. So you can't compare it to Rabbi Yossi's case where you have 3 stocker boxes, where each stocker box is only suitable at that time. Says the Gemara, Elu Avisi the Pesach, which we had once before. A person separated the sheep for Korban Pesach. The sheep got lost. He separated the second one. And both sheep are now available. The first sheep came back, Erev Pesach. So he's about to shech the Korban Pesach. He's got 2 sheep in front of him. And the question is, which one should he do? It's Nana Mafish Pischoy Ba'avad, he got lost. Vefish Achet Tachtav separated another one. Ba'achach them Salvish, and then the first one is found. Both are standing in front of him. Ezben Shiur Yaakov Divrei Chachamim. The Chachamim say you can bring whichever one you want. So again, you had a sheep, you got lost. Call it sheep A. A got lost. So he took sheep B. By the time he came to Erev Pesach, A came back. So now you got a choice which one to shech. The Chachamim say you can choose whichever one. Rabbi Yisroel, a mitzvah b'visha, you have to use a top of the base. If the second one was a better one, you should bring the second one. So Rav holds like Rabbi Yisroel that the first one's more important. And since the first one's more important, you bring the first one. And that is why he holds that in this case, when you've got A, B, which was a lottery and B died, and then you did C and D to replace them, don't use C and D like Rabbi Yisroel, rather use A and D. And as we mentioned, the Shalom tells us that even though regarding Korban Pesach, if the fatter one is the second one, you choose the second one. Here by the Se'ivim, we don't say that. The reason being, because by Se'ivim, we're not going to eat it. Since we're not going to eat it, it doesn't matter which one is fatter, we don't care. We're going to stop over here. And the Mitzvah Shem will upload the Mitzvah another share. This is a lot to absorb. And if there's any questions, literally feel free to call or text. But it is a complicated Gemara. It's a lot to absorb, so we'll stop here. Let's give time, and we'll carry on with Shem another time.